Hello and welcome back to another EDH deck design video. Today I'm going to be showing an updated list for my Marilyn of the Mornsong EDH deck. About a month and a half to 2 months ago I had proposed a theoretical deck list and transferred it to paper and started playing it. I have played Marilyn here religiously for the past month and a half and I've made quite a few changes to the deck. I also have assessed and reassessed how some interactions work with this type of general. So let's run through her real quick and I'll explain why that is necessary. Marilyn here is an uncommonly seen general. Most people will recognize her from early combo decks. What she is specifically, she's 1 black for a 2/3 elf wizard. The most important thing on her text for this deck and why I'm playing it is players can't draw cards. Those 4 words, first line of text box, that is the important reason why this deck exists. The second ability is a clever, it's kind of like a grim tutor for every opponent or every player on their upkeep during their draw phase, essentially. They lose 3 life, or I lose 3 life, and then you tutor. You search any card you want of your deck and you put in your hand. You have to search. It is necessary. You cannot fail to find. The loss of life is also, yeah, it's not something that, this is just an awkward general, really. You don't ideally want to give your opponents cards. But what people miss, although that first line of text, players can't draw cards, that bricks a massive percent out of most people's EDH decks. And there's a few really good interactions that we can play with, essentially, to work with that and benefit from it. The Grim Tutors, Grim Tutor is an old card that is exactly this part down here. We tutor, lose 3 life, and that is Grim Tutor. That is a nice effect we can also take advantage of. But that is also, in our deck here, a means to essentially initiate damage, start lowering the opponent's life. This is a mono black control deck, MBC. What that means is the deck wins via burn spells, like Exsanguinate. What Marilyn decks used to be, if you were to Google search Maralen EDH, you will find a plethora of decks revolving around Ad Nauseam. Because this was the first legendary creature, which was essentially a tutor in the command zone. Since Sidisi, the mono black Sidisi has been printed, she has replaced most of those decks. Ad Nauseam combo decks are common. I'm not going to get into that. I mean, this is just a boring combo. What they would do is essentially just use a tutor effect to get Ad Nauseam, draw their deck, and win with some means. Being it like the epic spell or whatever. There's just a lot of them. Without seeing that combo, Ad Nauseam being included in the deck, although there's just not a lot of Marilyn decks. And the theory is because you're giving your opponents a free tutor. That is a sound theory. But I'm legitimately saying, after playtesting this for so long, she is a legitimately threatening general. And not in just 1v1, but in multiplayer. So this is a deck that is tuned for somewhere between 2 to 3 opponents. It plays well. It plays very good against 1 opponent if they are not playing heavy control. And it also plays very well against multiple opponents if they are creature-based. There's lots of ins and outs for this deck. I'm going to show what my current list is here, and then we'll chatter more about the interactions. Again, the most important thing to remember, the reason we are running Marilyn is for this first 4 words. Players can't draw cards. This means also that my deck is finely tuned around Marilyn. I can't run something like a Phyrexian Arena in this deck. There's very little cards in this deck that specifically say draw cards. There's lots of card advantage through other means, and I'll show you. So for example, let's go into our creatures here. This is a brand new creature that's pretty interesting. This deck has an Armillary Sphere. That's a very underwhelming card in terms of card power to mana draw. But this is a new version of Armillary Sphere. It's a 3 mana 1/4 defender where I can sack it and get 2 basics from my deck into my hand. So it's a 2-for-1 effect. This acts as a defender. It comes out the same turn Marilyn could. But this also could help me get lands. It's going to help me get my landfalls. This is a very good card. It fits this deck perfectly and it has done very well. Similarly, we have Burnished Heart, which is a ramp. It puts them into play tapped. And Solemn, which is another ramp. Sadly, he does say draw card. He's here just for that ramp. Stuffy Doll is in this deck for a few reasons. There's a very specific card in here called Howl from Beyond, which is a troll card. And when I had theorized this deck that people would never block Marilyn, I was incredibly correct. No one really wants to block her unless there is a very severe punishment effect out. So there's a few cards that end up being troll cards to get to kill people with Marilyn, and they also work with Stuffy Doll. I'll reiterate that when I get there, but he also works well with a few other effects here. It's a defensive measure to keep myself alive. We do have to have some good spot removal. Duplicate is excellent at that. We cannot always destroy creatures in mono black. My spells like to kill creatures or do damage. This one will exile. Cryptogast. This deck is missing one card. This deck is essentially as I want it to be, except I am still missing a Nirkana Revenant. But this one does the job still. Extort is fantastic in this deck. And the double mana is why we are running mono black. Like that's mono black control decks that use a lot of mana doublers so they can make big bleed spells win the game. And this does exactly that. Liliana Shade is a placeholder till I get Nirkana's Revenant. This is also a legitimate threat. Since I will all too often have at least one mana doubler out when I'm willing to attack with this, opponents will always want to block. This is, of course, a 1-for-1 effect where it will always get me a land, so it is not card disadvantage. Sidisi is one of few tutors in the deck. This is something typically really good to dirtle around with, like a Phyrexian Reclamation. There's too few creatures in the deck for that, but this is still good enough to run. We have two late game effects. Kokosho is just for some life regain. I don't have a reanimation effects, but he's really good. And Obnixilis is one of the most severe punishment effects that runs with our general. What he is 6 mana for 4 flying tramples, adequate. But it says when an opponent searches their deck, they lose 10 life and they sack a creature. And when any creature dies, he gets counters. The trick here is she forces a search. So that means with these two out, the opponents have to search, or the opponent that goes on their upkeep and cannot kill these, they lose 13 and sack a creature. Now the trick there, this is a very obvious threat. He's not going to survive very long. If you have multiple opponents, the trick there is seeing if that opponent is going to take the damage and then find an answer for this before the next opponent then takes the damage. In 1v1, of course, they will just tutor up removal. In most 1v1 games, after my opponents are familiar with my deck, they use her first turns to tutor up removals for Marilyn, which is actually good. That just means that they are skipping their draw and they're losing 3 life to let us continually drop lands. And just continue developing our own board, which is actually what this deck wants. This is a mono black control deck. We want our lands so we can get bleed spells online to kill people with. So having them waste their early tutors to kill her, that's great. Let's go on to the spells. There's lots of spells in this deck. Let's start with some card advantage, pseudo card advantage. This is a tutor for the opponent's deck. It will either be an artifact or black card, obviously. But we can use this to get anything essential that we may be able to use to help continue developing our board. Then we have a singleton tutor as well to go with Sidisi. This is a pseudo tutor, pseudo answer. I just like this card. It can stop opponents from dirtling with their graveyard, but this transmute for 2 could get anything. It could literally tutor for a tutor, or it can tutor for a lot of the burn spells in this deck. Since something like Exsanguinate, which is X black in the deck, that is considered a converted mana cost 2. Then we have, this is a singleton draw spell. Marilyn, all too frequently she just dies a lot. Like her effect is powerful. Depending on the time of the board presence, you may know what your opponent's decks are capable of. You may know the answers, like the removal that those opponents are capable of. So you can actually essentially bend when you do and do not want to cast Marilyn on your experience with your opponent. But we have to have some generic draw on the deck because Marilyn will not always be around. Revive the Fallen. This isn't here because I love the artwork. This is also a very fun card to confuse the opponents. If Marilyn is out and you clash, you are revealing a card off the top of your deck. The opponent may be confused seeing that card, thinking that you're eventually going to have it in your hand. That has actually happened a few times. So that makes this actually worth including. This is essentially a creature, return creature from graveyard to hand. Not a lot of creatures, but this could potentially also be returned to hand, which means it's a free return. It's card pseudo advantage, not really, but it's there. Grim Discovery is fantastic because it returns a creature and or a land from graveyard to hand. In mono black decks, people like to destroy Cabal Coffers. This is a fantastic inclusion for exactly that reason. Dark Deal. This is another cruel effect that runs with Marilyn. What this does is a very bad variant of Wheel of Fortune, where each player discards all their cards in their hand and draws that many -1. With her out, players can't draw cards. So this spell puts everyone into Hellbent mode. The best way to get this to work, if she is allowed to survive for a turn or two, I will get some kind of pseudo-repeated card advantage. My favorite is actually the Sword of the Animist, because it allows me to continually develop mana and attack with her. And then my second turn, I will go ahead and get Dark Deal. Because that means I should have the mana to have cast the sword, and then the next turn I can cast Dark Deal. That puts everyone to top deck mode, and I will have on board card advantage by attacking with Marilyn and getting ramp. Bitter Revelation. This is an awkward version of Factor Fiction. It is not card draw. It does hurt me for 2, but I get to look at top 4 and put some from them into my hand, not drawing. And Moonlight Bargain is the best of the best here. It's instant speed. It lets me look at 5, and I can put the unneeded cards into my graveyard. Of course, it hurts. There are lots of creature answers in this deck. This deck has very few creatures, and I need to survive. So this entire stack here is designed around killing creatures. We have some spot removal. This is important because at times I may need to kill Marilyn herself. Very specifically, I may need to tutor up for a removal spell before my own effects ruin my hand. And I'll explain that when I get there, but Go for the Throat, for example, kills a non-artifact, so I can kill Marilyn. I dug this out, dirtling with a random standard deck, and I had an extra one of these, so -4/-4, this is not super good removal. This should be a Dismember, I just don't have enough right now, but this could also kill Marilyn. Snuff Out is not going to kill Marilyn, but it's usually a free spell. Tendrils for lots of life gain. We have Withering Boon to counter a creature. Cruel Edict, sorcery speed, target opponent or player sacks a creature. Toxic Deluge for a 3-drop board wipe, a 3-drop -2/-2 effect. Ashes to Ashes is to exile 2 creatures. Barter and Blood makes everyone sack 2 creatures, so I can get rid of Marilyn if need be. Deadly Tempest is a 6-drop board wipe that tends to really punish token-based decks. This has actually killed 2 separate players on 2 separate occasions. This is actually a very good board wipe. I cannot recommend this enough. This is currently like a quarter, like 25 cents. For a 6-drop board wipe, that's an average mana cost nowadays, I suppose, but this extra life loss effect can be incredibly powerful. Necromantic Selection is going to exile itself, but for 7 mana I can destroy everything and reanimate one of them. All is Dust hurts because I will sacrifice my own enchantments, but Decree of Pain will let me draw some cards. This is circumvented. This is not circumvented by her ability. When you destroy the creature, she will no longer be around to see the second effect, so I will draw the cards. I've had multiple people call me out on that, and I have had multiple judges confirm this with me. This will kill all the creatures. Even if she dies, I will still draw the cards. And let's go on to 3 dirtily spells, and then I'll go on to the win condition spells. Darkness is a random fog. Something like this may be necessary to survive a turn or 2 more, just so I continue bleeding people out. Howl from Beyond is a random combat trick. It is the old one from Alpha Beta with that ugly fish thing, but I love this artwork the best. It's like Mono Red Enrage, same card or effect. It is a X burn spell. What people really don't like doing, unless I have something like Ob Nixilis out, people really don't like to chump block Marilyn. They want to take advantage of her unless they have some specific effect out that they need to draw a card, for example. There's usually somebody I can attack with Marilyn. But this also typically means that that it's just so easy to get up to 19 extra mana to pump into her and kill somebody. If not more. The other fun one is, of course, Stuffy Doll. Because I can attack with Stuffy Doll. He's not a defender. So if somebody does want to block the Stuffy Doll, I can pump their creature. If they do not want to block Stuffy Doll, I can pump Stuffy Doll. And again, that's random fun interactions that people really don't expect to see that, and that really does get people. And then finally, our last shenanigans card in the deck is Imp's Mischief. It is a random retarget reselect there. And then we have the win condition spells in the deck, which are all burn spells. Suffer the Past is a limited burn spell. This requires lots of cards in the opponent's graveyard. This could be used early game utility to stop some kind of recursion effect. But it is essentially an X bleed spell, where X is limited to my mana and the number of cards in that opponent's graveyard. Pretty good utility. We have Consume Spirit, which is an old one which is limited to only black mana, which is bleed X. And we have Drain Life, which is the original. Then we have a Soul Burn, which is a slight upgrade, quote unquote, because you can use red mana instead of only black. It's just, it costs an extra one there just because of that effect. And then we have Profane Command, which is a double black X burn spell with some other mode. And then we have Exsanguinate, which is typically the game-ending spell. And then we have Corrupt, which is a 6-drop, which just does a specific amount of damage equal to the number of swamps. So those are the cards that we use to actually win the game with. The rest of the deck is developing our board presence, so let's go into the enchantments. Necropotence is a sort of non-bow with our general. So we skip our draw step right here, which means we skip the tutorage, which also means we skip the life loss. So we can just directly pay to draw. I've had more issues with this than I thought I would, simply because sometimes I need things in my graveyard. There's not a lot of reanimation, and I'd have no way other than All is Dust to get rid of this, but this actually tends to debate out removal itself because it is commonly known as a severe threat. Necropotence is powerful. If you don't know that, you may need to play someone or against someone who has Necropotence. Oubliette, this is not really supposed to be in the deck anymore. This is just, I have a passion for this card. I've played it a lot extensively in mono black. It's an almost automatic shoe-in staple, although there are far better exile effects nowadays. It is an old version of like an Oblivion Ring, where it can also maintain like enchantments and counters even if this were to die. Then we have Shade's Form, which is another great mana sink. It gives the enchanted creature Shade, and then it also has, it reanimates the creature if the creature were to die. Two very powerful effects on a 3-drop enchantment in a mono black control deck. This is very good. Withering Wisp and Pestilence. These two are almost the same card. This is a snow version. I am, of course, playing snow lands, otherwise I would not be playing this, but both of them have the effect of paying 1 black into it to deal 1 damage to each creature and player. This one is limited to just the number of snow-covered lands I control, so doubling the mana, like in this one, does not work out, but does cost 1 less. Each also has to be destroyed if there's no creatures on my... at the end of turn, or any turn really. Again, this is something that goes really good with Stuffy Doll because I can continually burn out and do double damage to a particular opponent. We have Enslave, which is really good at getting some boss creature the opponent might have tutored for, and that we can't really deal with. And Liliana of the Dark Realms. This is another very good early game tutor with Marilyn if my goal is to put everybody in Hellbent mode, because it's going to get me an extra card every single turn if it is not dealt with, and that is just absolutely fantastic. Now let's go on to the artifacts. My favorite card to get with Marilyn, if I am not disrupted, is actually Sword of the Animus. This is an awkward one. It is not as threatening as a lot of people would consider me to tutor up, and that's actually a good thing. People don't really know what you tutor up, and if you're tutoring up something like this, and you just cast it and equip it to Marilyn, it's just an evasive, non-threatening play, and a lot of people don't expect that. But this can get you an extra card every single turn. This is exactly what the deck wants. It wants to get extra cards so I can then get up to those big spells. We have 2 equipment that are just threatening on their own. These 2 give the equipped creature +1/+1 for the number of swamps. Again, this can make something really whimsical like Marilyn get through for lethal very fast because I have lots of creature removal. And we have Mimic Vat, which is a placeholder. This was going to be... what was that going to be? I don't remember. This was a placeholder for something else. I think I was going to get an Urborg for the deck, but I didn't need any more lands, really. It ended up being really good if I can get some kind of, like, Solemn on there. So it's in and out. It may be cut soon. Teferi's Puzzle Box is the second Cruel card. Much like the Dark Deal, this interaction with Marilyn can put everybody into a Hellbent mode if they are unfamiliar with this. The puzzle box is a little confusing. What it does is on everyone's draw step, they put the cards in their hand on the bottom of their deck and they draw that many cards. This occurs after priority is done. Like in-game priority, you have to draw a card first because that is a mandatory part of the game, and then your draw step continues. So you draw a card, then you put your cards in the bottom. So what happens here, with Marilyn out, you can't draw cards. So you have to then just put all the cards in your hand on the bottom of your deck. Now, depending on your level of douchebaggery, you may want to explain this to your opponents. You can stack these to go off at any... You can choose which one to resolve first. Which means you could choose to go get a creature removal spell before this resolves, so you can kill Marilyn, so you don't lose your hand. Again, this is a very powerful interaction. Depending on your skill level of your opponents, you may not want to explain that to them if you feel that they should understand that on their own. I mean, it specifically says on both cards at the beginning of your draw step. So, I mean, if they see it, they see it. If they don't, they don't. But I've told everybody, because I feel mean putting everyone in Hellbent mode. It's an interaction, and they do have to deal with that. If they don't have creature removal that's instant speed, well, they're screwed anyways. But again, this is why we have instant speed removal, to kill our own Marilyn. Because we can, like, Grasp of Darkness or go for the Throat her after this has a chance of going around the table and putting everyone in Hellbent mode. That is a very powerful effect. Going on, we have mana doublers with Cage Sun and Gauntlet. I do not like extra planar lens because the potential setback if it is flickered multiple times or destroyed or bounced. Then we have Soul Ring and Wayfarer's Bauble because I like basic land ramp. There's no need for a lot of other ramp in this deck when I'm focusing more on land, putting lands into play. Expedition Map is here to get me one of few lands. Yes, there's a Cabal Coffers in here, but I actually like Scrying Sheets more because it will give me possible card advantage, although Coffers is ideal. Armillary Sphere is just a 2-for-1 effect to help landfall, especially because I cannot draw. Same thing, Journeyer's Kite. This is a repeated land grab every turn, so again, when she is out, if everyone is in Hellbent mode, this is a slow card advantage that will help me get to the late game. And finally, we are on to the lands. There are still 37 lands, I believe. Let's check. So, of course, we have to have the coffers. I was wanting to get an Urborg in here, so this taps for more. That may come. I'm not too sure yet. Then we have a Scrying Sheets. There are a lot of snow lands in here, 32 basic snow swamps. So this is a potential card advantage. If I can peel cards from the top of my deck, I'm not drawing them. I'm looking at them and putting them to my hand. Then we have Winding Canyons. Just like in my Braids deck, this is a card that has a very, very powerful effect. If I can hold this up and just flash her out at the end of the opponent's turn, I can take advantage of her and then get a free tutor. This is, of course, a broadcasted card. A lot of people don't recognize this card since it's a little unique. But after one single activation, they will definitely remember. Thawing Glaciers is the final pseudo card advantage. That's a repeatable effect. Something like this can every other turn get us an extra 1 out. This is really good if you have untapped shenanigans, since the bounce only happens at the end of the turn. And then we have Myriad Landscape for some ramp. And then, of course, the 32 Swamps. So, this is the current design I am running Marilyn as. It is a rather mean deck, I've been told, although in my opinion, it's fair. It helps you see what your opponents are playing because they will tutor up what they deem is necessary to either kill you, kill her, or to try to win under you. This deck is, of course, packed full of answers. If their win condition is creature-based, they are going to have a hard time. It's just interesting, and it's actually a very powerful deck. Most mono black control generals or decks, from my experience, they have very boring early game states. This makes for a very chaotic one, even if it's just one opponent or multiple opponents. The chaos is real, and the fun is real, because not everyone wants to kill Marilyn. Some people don't want your other friends to tutor, so a lot of people don't want you to tutor, so they'll expend resources. But the important thing to keep in mind is that they are taking 3 life at least before, by actually having her out. No one has actively just killed her unless they have had like Arcanist the Omnipotent or Zami in the command zone, which of course is really mean to play, a general that specifically says players can't draw cards. But yeah, I'll keep this running. Any ideas or opinions, I'm always welcome.